My journey has been a roller coaster, so I'd like to take you back to the very beginning of this long and crazy story that I like to call life. My mom always made a joke that if I was the firstborn child, I'd be an only child. What can I say? I was a rebellious kid. I had a pretty good childhood and some amazing memories growing up. The summer before college, after my senior year, was supposed to be a fun time. One last hurrah, if you will, but it took a turn for me. I remember the exact day I started to feel like something was off.
Well, this is my routine, and then I back up so she can get right to her driveway.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes. I mean, I haven't been here very long, but after therapy and when I'm very tired, it's kind of a far walk to get to my apartment.
So that's why we do this, and then she can get a straight ride.
It was June of 2019. I woke up one morning, totally normal. I was 25, I was traveling, I was working. Well, I was an event planner. When you're an event planner, everything on site is your issue. So I did a lot. I traveled to Texas, Chicago, Miami Beach, and I woke up and I was having trouble drinking the water on my nightstand, and I was like, that's strange. Over the next couple of months, I started having weird symptoms. I would get dizzy spells. I thought that maybe it was my anxiety because I just got promoted at work.
You want some carrot? I made too much carrot. I prepared more carrot than I need for the salad. I pretty much make all of our own salad dressings except for ranch, because that's all Emma will eat. And Trent likes to cook. He's a good cook. He's been so chaotic with school as of late.
Because I think that'll fit great in there temporarily. Yeah, if it dies, it dies. If it dies before the exhibit tomorrow, it's not fine.
We're going to go back to the school district next year.
Because then I can go to a technical high
He's going
school.
to hopefully get into the...
Yeah, which is very exciting. I mean, honestly, but you can come here and make art anytime.
I wrote an entire story about a post-apocalyptic world. The whole theme of this project is that the main character, Alder, has to go out into the world on, I want to say, a mission, an adventure to attempt to find a place that is kind of like if you think of almost Atlantis-like.
We noticed when he was about 8 months that he wasn't using his right hand. The doctor just kept saying that he was probably just a lefty. But you know how when you have a baby and you give them their fingers and you walk along with them, he would only hold it with one hand. And if he was eating food, you would see this hand would have food on it, and this side of his face would have food on it, and this hand would be clean. At his next appointment, I said, this is kind of stressing me out. Look at it a little more closely and see what's going on with him. And so they sent him for a brain MRI, which honestly, I thought there was something wrong with his hand. It really didn't occur to me that there was something wrong with his brain. They sedated him because you can't do an MRI of a baby awake. So they sedated him. They're calling all these people down to the MRI suite stat. And I'm thinking that cannot be for my kid. Why would they be calling people down to the MRI suite? And he puts the MRI up on the screen thing and put the light behind it. And the mass was it was the size of my fist. It was so big. And then they rushed him to emergency brain surgery.
19 years ago, my son was 5 months old, and I was exhausted as a new mom, and I just was having these weird symptoms, and I just thought I was tired. And I think the thing that really set it off for me that something was wrong, I sat down to try to tie my shoes, and I just couldn't. I just could not figure out how to tie my shoes. And I looked up at my husband and said, something is really wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital. And he said, why? And I said, I just cannot figure out how to tie my shoes. So we went to the emergency room in a very small town in North Georgia. They didn't even have an MRI. They had a CAT scan, and they came back to me and said, "We see a spot on your brain." And I said, "A spot? A spot? What does that mean, a spot?" And they said, "There is some bleeding on your brain." And I said, "Okay, what does this mean?" And they said, "Well, we don't really know because we don't have an MRI. We're going to send you to another hospital." The best they could tell me was, once the blood reabsorbs, hopefully we'll be able to see behind it. So I get back home. I'm sitting on the floor holding him because I didn't know if my arm would give out and I didn't want to drop him. And I'm reading him Winnie the Pooh. And there's a quote from Winnie the Pooh that says, "You have to be stronger than you believe, braver than you think." And I can't remember the exact quote now, but I read that to him. And, it says, "If there's ever a time that I'm not with you, know that I will always be with you." And I thought I wanted him to know that I would always be with him, even if I wasn't here. But then I thought to myself, well, I have to be braver than I think and stronger than I believe so that I can beat this, so that I can be here with him.
I don't even know any families, like Darla and I haven't met yet. She said she's gonna come by today. She's like the most local person I know.
I'm sure a lot of people struggled during COVID with being kind of kept in the house, and I know it takes a mental toll, but her being born right at the start of the pandemic, it impacted us less because she brought so much joy into the house.
I was actually standing right here, not for the diagnosis, but Charles came down and was holding Bella, and she started having a seizure. Took her to the doctor because she had been acting just odd. Her hands kept shaking and just weird symptoms. They did an EEG, and they did an overnight one, saw she was having seizures overnight that were focal, so she wasn't even, "Hi, sweetie." And then they sent us home with seizure medication and follow-ups with neurologists, but when we came home, we were like, what do we do from here?
So they're operating. It was like a 6-hour surgery, I think. The doctor comes out afterwards and says, when it cut into his brain, black blood that looked like motor oil started pouring out all over the table. I will always have that image in my head. They didn't get any of the lesion. They just cleaned up the mess, closed it up, and said, hopefully that won't happen again.
So in September of 2019, I got an MRI on my brain, which led them to my cavernoma. So it was 3 centimeters, and it was on my brainstem. And I had a surgery in September of 2019 to remove it. And then in December, I started declining again. And so on December 10th, I had a second surgery to remove, I guess, more of the cavernoma that they thought that they removed the first time. And then I had a further decline when I was in rehab to the point where I couldn't talk, I couldn't swallow, I had a feeding tube, and I had a third surgery on December 30th where they discovered that there was more cavernoma, which they didn't remove the first time or the second time. So I always say third time's a charm because they got it all the third time, but I was left with a multitude of deficits. I have paralysis, I have balance issues, my eye is actually stitched shut. It's called a torsorrhaphy because I can't blink, I can't produce tears in my eye. But over everything that happened to me, I just feel really grateful that I'm alive because it could have ended totally differently.
Fast forward a little bit, this happens all over again. I'm sitting on the sofa, I feel this wave come over, my arm just drops again, becomes paralyzed again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening all over again. Again, I'm fortunate. I'm at my mother's house. I walk back to my bedroom, lay on the bed, scream for my mother to come to the back. Unfortunately, my son was in the room, and I have my first grand mal seizure.
Yes, so maybe I'll turn it around and say that patients bleed in their brain from various causes. Most of us recognize bleeding from high blood pressure, or as we get older, there is bleeding in the brain. Cavernous malformation is a lesion that predisposes to hemorrhage in the brain at a younger age without high blood pressure and without the other risks.
So I'm Mark Kahn. I run a lab at Penn. I have for a bit over 20 years. Yeah, I mean, a cavernoma is what's classically called a vascular malformation. And a vascular malformation is pretty much what it sounds like. It's when instead of forming a normal vessel, you form an abnormal vessel.
And they did the EEG and saw that she was having seizures overnight, put her on seizure medication, saw she was continuing to have seizures. And so they did an MRI, and through the MRI, they saw the cavernomas. They actually told us they wanted to remove one of the cavernomas. So she had 5 cavernomas, and there was one that they felt like that was the one that was causing the seizures. And it was in a place that we know brain surgery is not serious. It's definitely risky, but they said it's lower risk to remove it.
My story began right around the turn of the century. At that time, I had a 4-month-old infant who was at that point happy and growing well and doing all of the things that a 4-month-old would do. Right around New Year's, as the millennium was kicking in, she became ill and wound up being diagnosed in an emergency kind of way with cavernous malformations. They were large, there were multiple, and the same day that she was diagnosed, she had her first brain surgery. We went just 10 more months before she had her second brain surgery, and then another year and she had her third brain surgery. So this little 2-year-old girl had been through 3 major medical events.
Hi, my name is Jan-Karl Burkhardt. I'm one of the vascular neurosurgeons here at Penn Medicine. Cavernous malformation is a vascular malformation in the brain or spine. So that means there's a pathological change within the vessels, especially in the small capillaries, so the very tiny vessels in the brain. And that causes an uncontrolled growth in that area, and that causes this classic mulberry or raspberry shape of vascular malformation, which we call cavernoma or CCM.
And they're in the part of the vasculature called the capillaries where blood moves slowly through. So when something happens, when they hemorrhage, it's not a big explosion like you would see with an aneurysm. It's more of an oozing, or gradual over time. So over the course of a few days, people have more and more progressive symptoms.
Bleeding in the brain would cause headaches, would cause seizures, or would cause stroke-like symptoms like weakness or visual difficulties or speech difficulties. So patients may not even know they have a cavernous angioma until they suffer one of these symptoms and get an MRI of the brain that will show that they have this lesion.
We have to differentiate between 2 types of cavernomas we see, the familiar type and the sporadic type. Because the sporadic type is usually just a single lesion and has a very good prognosis when you treat the lesion, because it was a single mutation in one cell, and when you treat it, then you're cured from it. If you have a familiar type of mutation, so it means you're born with mutations in all of your cells, it's more a chronic disease, unfortunately. So if there are multiple lesions, which lesions needs treatment, and we have to be very careful with surgical indication, because we know over a lifetime these lesions can, new lesions can form. So the prognosis is a little bit different here.
Basically, what I know is sporadic means that you only have one. And if they got the whole thing, it's likely to not grow back. But the genetic, like I know some people have like hundreds in their brain, all over their brain, and like it's sad. And like some people don't even know that they have it until they're a lot older and they're, you know, they already reproduced and had children, and then I passed it down to my kids. So it's just, it's really sad.
We never heard cavernous angioma or cavernous malformation or any of that stuff at that point. And then we had the genetic testing. And so my husband and I both got tested. And quite frankly, I was sure it had to be my husband, but no, it was me. So then when Amma was born, we had her cord blood tested.
Well, I didn't know I had them so much, but I knew there was a pretty decent possibility that I might have them. I was on the playground and I was sitting on the monkey bars when I don't know how, it's like I fell through the monkey bar and then I was on the ground and I whacked my head really hard against the side of the monkey bars and was mildly concussed.
So they went ahead and did the CT scan and they found a couple of spots in her brain and of course freaked out and thought it was a tumor. And I said, it's not a tumor. I felt like I was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It might be a tumor.
It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor at all.
So she had an MRI and lo and behold, it was a cavernous angioma and it had bled. So, but it had bled a long time ago. She's convinced, if you ask her when she thinks that bled, she'll tell you about this time in kindergarten when the gym teacher wouldn't let her go to the nurse and she had the worst headache of her whole life.
Oh.
And she's quite sure that that was when it must have bled. And she could be right.
If you're sitting in a movie theater, there's one person who has it. That doesn't mean it will ever do anything to them. Okay. That's what the common lesion is. It's a lesion, just like you might have a little degeneration in your disc. That doesn't mean you're going to get paralyzed from that. We want to make sure that lesion never acquires the features of causing a stroke or seizures or disability to the patients.
We've had a few different kind of major findings over the years, and what we had found was if you delete the CCM gene only and you create the CCM deficiency state, you can create lesions in neonatal mice. But if you wait only a week or two after birth, even a week, you won't see any lesion formation. This was strange because we know that most individuals with CCM lesion present much later in life, typically as adults. So it sort of suggested that there was something we were missing. And so we kind of hypothesized that maybe you needed more than one genetic change to get a full-blown CCM in an adult. And probably when you have both together is when you get a CCM that grows very rapidly.
So current options are limited for us mainly to surgery or observation. The surgical resection has a high success rate. If you take the lesion out completely for patients with sporadic CCM, you're cured, and it's very unlikely that this will come back. As I mentioned, in familiar type with multiple lesions, this is a different story, but you treat them symptomatically with surgery. Another important thing is in CCMs who are in areas who are not very eloquent, it's also important to make sure to remove the hemosiderin staining, not the lesion itself, also the chronic blood, because that can still cause seizures. So if the patient presented with seizures, you have to make sure to also remove that area if it's safe. That's not the case, for example, in the brainstem. There you would leave it behind, or in other eloquent areas.
We had an MRI recently. She had 5, we removed the 1, so she had 4, and then the last MRI that we had, she now has 7. So we expected it, based on the expectations that we know about CCM, but it was not easy to hear.
I feel like it almost it gave us some peace, like to have words to put to it. Because at that point we literally just thought his brain was bleeding for no reason. No one could explain to us why he kept having bleeding in his brain. So to be able to call it something was sort of a relief.
My neurosurgeon told me that I was likely born with it, and then over time it was just getting larger and larger.
She thought she was the only person in the world that had anything in their brain. And so we found these authors and nurses had recommended books to us of other people's stories, but she couldn't read them. So we read them to her in ICU.
20 years ago, there was nothing. There were no ways for patients to meet each other. There were no ways for researchers, honestly, to meet each other. They didn't know each other. There was no way to find great care. Nobody knew how to get it. There was no information on the internet for patients to learn and make good decisions for themselves or for their children.
Something that was frustrating was when we would tell people that she had CCM, they would do like their own quick Google search or whatever, and they would find information. And there would be cases that people wouldn't even know they have it because they had no symptoms, and they would relate that to Bella, and they'd be like, oh, she'll be fine. You know, there's, you know, it's not that impactful. So kind of sharing with people the differences was really important.
We didn't know a single other family. And so that is how Angioma Alliance, that was what we were called then, came about, was trying to find answers, trying to find the other families first. I managed to find the one textbook that had the information about the illness, and I wrote to the editor, one of the editors who happens to be a neurosurgeon named Dr. Issa Mawad. And he wrote me back that afternoon. I told him I wanted to start a patient organization. He said, I think that's a great idea. Here are some things you could do, and I'd be happy to be your scientific advisor.
It took me a long time to get diagnosed. It took me probably 2 years to get proper diagnosis. This time, I look it up on the internet, and lo and behold, I find Angioma Alliance. And I connect with Connie, and this is my opportunity to be stronger than I think I can be, and be braver than I believe I can be, and try to do something to help not only myself, but help other people.
You know, it's like we just felt like we're so alone, and that's why we're so grateful for the Alliance, because we feel like we have people now that are helping us, on our team, helping us navigate and find resources and find support, and more importantly, find a cure.
The first Zoom I attended was CCM 101, and so that's how I learned all about like what it is, what all the terms are, like, and I've used that website for pretty much everything.
The Alliance has weekly meetings every Thursday. So I use Zoom every Thursday. I go on there, and it's a support group.
So our journey starts quite a number of years. Joyce Gonzalez had started working on a family tree in New Mexico to see who might have this mutation. We live in a very small rural community in eastern New Mexico, and they identified many people here in the community that were part of this lineage. My husband got tested first. That way, if we could rule him out, we could rule everybody out pretty much. He was positive for the Hispanic mutation, the CCM1, and my daughter was positive also. So both of my daughters are positive, and my son is negative. And in 2018, my husband started exhibiting problems with his vision. He had a lesion. He had a very large lesion, about 4 centimeters. His lesion, not only was it large, it was dead center in the brain. By the time, though, that we got into the day before the surgery for pre-op, he was no longer able to walk on his own. So I have a beautiful picture that we keep of my 3 kids propping him up and walking into the barrel for his surgery. The surgery was a huge success. Dr. Lawton said that the lesion was huge, and coming from a world-renowned neurosurgeon, it had to be pretty impressive. At the very beginning, he reverted to Spanish, and then little by little had to learn I think, and it wasn't even relearning. He had to figure out how to recall things that were in his brain. Had to learn how to use his hands, and he was right-handed before, but his left side really progressed really quickly and is normal. We were actually there for 6 weeks. With CCM, it's not even the number of lesions in your brain, it's the bleeds and where. It's all about real estate. It's all about location. You know, people are saying, well, do you think it's more prevalent? I'm like, no, it's not more prevalent. It's just more awareness. It's, you know, we're actually talking about it. It's like, I don't know if you remember, like when you were pregnant, it's like everybody's pregnant. I mean, it's educate, it's talk about it, it's share information, you know, be as open as possible about this so that people are comfortable learning more.
You know, when I'm teaching CCM 101 and I'm listening to people's stories, it definitely brings me back sometimes to those moments when Trent was small, and when he was first diagnosed, and how awful that was to not know what was going on, to not understand. And then I guess for me, that it makes me really passionate about wanting to give people that information so that they don't have that same experience.
One of the schools I go to is the Center for Performing and Fine Arts. And that is so much fun. I love that. 4 class periods. I do my art forms. I do photography, graphic design, screenwriting, and then vocal. And I love that stuff so much.
Once he had his surgery, we sat down and had a conversation. What do we do now? How do we let this affect the rest of our life? And we decided as a couple, as his parents, we are going to give him the most normal life he could possibly have.
It's challenging, I think, for Black patients for many, many reasons. One is that a lot of times we tend to be uninsured, underinsured, even when we are well insured, well educated. Assumptions are made about us when we walk into a hospital. You know, they'll never even go to a doctor and discuss these symptoms until they end up, you know, with worsening symptoms. And that is what we're trying to get at with breaking barriers in members of the Black community.
Yeah, there's just so many things that can go wrong with cavernous malformations. And, you know, if this is what it looks like after, you know, 1 year and 2 years, what's this gonna look like in 10 years? You know, what's this gonna look like when she's 20 years old? And that is incredibly scary.
Even if her life is completely, she doesn't have symptoms or anything like that, but having a baby, you know, she's gonna have 50% chance of passing on to her children. So even just the little things throughout her life, you know, even if everything does go smoothly with her symptoms, her life is just gonna be a little bit harder.
You know, I think time and health are the 2 greatest currencies in the world now that that we're going through this with Isabella. I wish I could give her those things. And with there not being a cure, we're doing everything we can, but there's just so much that we can't control. And that's been really hard.
It's funny what you can get used to. That's what I would say. It's strange the things that you never would have thought could be normal, and now they're normal. He's had a particularly aggressive course of cavernous malformations already. You know, I never want to look back and say, God, he didn't get to live a life. We stopped him from getting to have any kind of experiences because we were scared.
I have a friend who has the same thing that I do, and you know, I have the sporadic version of this disease. He has a genetic version, so for him, like, he, you know, doesn't want to have children to pass on this disease for generations to come because he doesn't want to, you know, have his child suffer like mother did or he did. So I think, you know, finding a cure would make people be able to live their lives and have a happy life and not have to worry about passing something along to their kids or not, wondering what tomorrow will bring.
My perspective is these patients really need to be seen in the specialized centers. And there are centers of excellence, and the advantage of a center of excellence is not only knowing or seeing a lot of these patients, but also collaborating within different subspecialties.
So a typical neurosurgeon might see one cavernous angioma every 2 to 3 years in their busy practice. At the center of excellence, they would see several cases a week.
Centers of excellence are places that we can trust, that our patients can go to and get multidisciplinary expert care. So most of our patients see neurosurgeons, neurologists, some of them see geneticists, everybody has a radiologist in the loop. We know in our centers of excellence, because we vetted them, that in all those disciplines, they're getting expert care.
More and more there will be clinical trials looking also into medication for CCM patients. There's a trial started already. It's a drug who looks into a patient with symptomatic CCM to see if the medication versus placebo is helping these patients to stabilize or regress the lesion to eventually avoid open surgery.
REC 994 is a drug that has just started in phase 2 clinical trials. And why is it special? This is the first drug that's being made just for our illness, for CCM. It's important for several reasons. One is because we hope that it helps our patients. But the other is that once you have one medicine get through that clinical trial process, then it becomes apparent to other industry partners that this is doable.
Just hearing about the progress that's been made in the past year gets me extremely hyped up about it.
We were watching the REC 994 trial that's happening right now. It was
so cool.
It was so cool.
So cool.
We can study the lesions that get removed surgically. Nobody gets their head opened and a lesion removed unless it's growing rapidly or bleeding or doing something that merits, a pretty dramatic intervention. So we have to start with the understanding that we've looked at the most aggressive lesions. The mutations that we find in CCM lesions are exactly the same sort of spectrum of molecular mutations that have been found in cancer. And in the paper that we recently published, we line them up, and it's remarkable. They look exactly the same. And the good news is that because this has been, on the radar for cancer for so long, there are drugs that have been developed and tested. And in our preliminary studies in mice, these drugs are also very effective at slowing down growth.
I think we're going to have probably another 2 to 3 trials in North America. There may be another effort in the European Union for testing another drug. And I think it's going to be a healthy landscape where we find the truth through the clinical trial enterprise.
And another thing that's important is to have more Black people and people of color in general in our database of patients who are willing to participate in our patient registry, so that as we have the potential for drug trials, that there are patients who are available to participate in those drug trials. Fortunately, finally, the FDA has said we need to have diverse patient populations in drug trials. And so if we don't have enough diverse patients available to participate in those drug trials, then they won't happen.
So the future of CCM, if we figure out a drug to prevent formation or regression, then the future is hopefully just taking a pill and not having needed to have a surgery. So basically, get rid of my job. that would be the goal of, and hopefully the future of CCM.
The push for research and a cure, you can see that that's progressed over the last 20 years to a point where there's real hope for a cure in the next, 5 to 10 years. Trials take time. I would love to have a cure tomorrow, but knowing that that's happening, it just gives me a lot of hope for the future. I would like to have a cure so that my kids can have a future where they don't have to worry about this all the time, where they can choose to have kids and their kids don't have to worry about this all the time.
I look at photos of the old me and I don't know who that person is. It's not me anymore. And it made me sad for a while, but I realized that like life now is life and I have to live it, and I can't look back on what it was. I have to live my life as it is. I was super lucky with my surgeries, not 1, not 2, but 3. I made it through 3 and I'm still alive, and I feel like I was kept here for a reason, and I have to, you know, make do with that and make sure that I am positive and spread positivity and do something positive with why I was kept here.
It took 20 years to have the first clinical trial of a medication specifically for cavernomas. And now we have this really fantastic momentum. But there's a lot of things that had to happen, that had to be put into place to make that happen. And none of it is free.
I mean, everything. I mean, if she was able to, you know, take a medication, I mean, we wouldn't have to worry about the future. She could have a normal life. It is a life-saving thing to find a cure for CCM.
Further deficits can be prevented because there's something that can be done that doesn't require surgery and doesn't require touching your brain and causing further deficits. Because for me, you know, I didn't have this before I had my surgeries, and this happened because of my cavernoma and because of my surgery. So if there was something that could be done to make sure that people moving forward didn't have to, you know, have the deficits like I did, I really think that that would be what I would say is a cure.
What risks are out there now that we've gone through this? Then the other part is, hey, if we can get through this, you know, we can get through anything. So
I'm just glad that someone is thinking about CCM, and I want them to keep thinking about CCM and not lose momentum, and, you know, hope that we can find some type of treatment or cure soon.